Hello, all. Let's talk about titles. Let's just jump right into things. This morning, right now, let's jump into things. Let's talk about titles. How much do you think about a title when you're writing a poem? Obviously, you can't give me an answer, but we'll have discussions about this. You can respond below. But how much do you think about it? Is it something that comes before you write the poem? Is it something that comes much later? Are you somebody who doesn't really like titles at all? A few of you haven't seemed to provide many on some of even the workshop stuff that we've done. There's no right or wrong answer to this. But I'll tell you what I think about titles, and we'll talk a little bit more about them before I give you an exercise that I want you to do for next week. Now, when it comes to titles, I like to think about the title as an argument as to why somebody should read the poem. So when you read the title, you might get a sense of whether or not you want to continue on. I mean, I think that the first line of the poem and every subsequent line are all arguments to varying degrees. I think the argument lessens as a poem goes on. But we can say that the first line of a poem is an argument as to why you should read the second. And the second is an argument as to why you should read the third and continue on. If we get to line 10 of a 12-line poem, we're probably not really making an argument as to why you finish. You're in deep enough that probably you will. But I want you to think about this as an argument. What I mean by that is, why should I keep going? And the title is an argument, but kind of a different sort. It's not necessarily telling me a ton about what the poem is going to do, but it gives me just enough to give an understanding of what could be happening. A provocative title could draw me in. I'm still going to potentially read a poem if I don't like the title, and believe me, it's always true for your poems. Never going to not read a poem just because the title doesn't grab me. But if we're going through a collection and you don't see any titles that really grab you, then maybe you're not going to feel as invested in this, and that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? So what I want to do is I got a stack of books. And I want to take a look at some titles and talk about them a little bit and which ones grab you. And I'll just read some, but we'll just see how they feel. And all I could really talk about is how they make me feel, but we'll talk about how they make you feel too down in the comments, because I want you to discuss a little bit more about this as we go on. But this is a book called Cleaning a Rainbow by Gary Gildner. The first poem is called All This. It's kind of interesting, right? There's something large and encompassing about the title. This one is The Gig, Robespierre on the other page. They're short, they're punchy. The 1902 dime. That's kind of intriguing, isn't it? That makes me wonder what's going to be going on as we go forward. Days of 1952. Themes start to come up just based on titles. Here's a collection by Dennis Johnson. This is his collected works. The Throne of the Third Heaven of the Nation's Millennium General Assembly. We've gone from short, catchy titles in Gary Gildner to something maybe that's a little bit different, at least based on the way we see the title of the collection. We've got Quickly Aging here. Boy, age 6, Remembering. Victory. Spring. So right away, we get some titles that some of them are a little bit longer. Why I Might Go to the Next Football Game is a little bit longer. But I also get poems with titles like Retirement. There's no right or wrong way to do this. There are varying successes and degrees in which we've got. This is an old book by Robert Gregory called Boy Picked Up by the Wind. And Gregory likes to have a lot of titles that are very, very long. Here's one. I'll read it. What the old woman who sat at the bedside of the famous sailor who discovered the world told him in order to help him die. Does that give you a sense of what the poem's going to do? I think it does, right? Here's another one. Jimmy says to the lady behind the counter, "What you looking at, lady?" And she says, "I looking at you, son bitch." It's got personality. It's got a voice. It's got a direction. That's one way we can do it. You've got to figure out what feels best for you. Here's Catherine Beauvais. Here, High Note, High Note. This is a more experimental poet, but she's going to have titles that are a little bit long, and her titles sort of represent the style of language she uses in poems. The language in her poems isn't as straightforward. It's not narrative. Words jump around. So she's got titles that represent that. Here's The Day Itself. It selves with me so. Leg me, light thing I look at bowl, skin width. There's a poetry logic to some of her poems, but it's not necessarily something that feels logical in the way that it's structured. But the poems represent this. So it makes sense that she has poems that have titles like Ceiling Hooks, Saw Her Crab Legs Soak, We Got. They trip up a little bit, but that's okay. That's kind of one of the things that this poet is doing. This is Battle Sleep by Shannon Jonas. And no sign of getting much better, but good luck to you in India. This book is for my sister. So titles maybe that feel a little more intimate, a nickel for every time, that have a little bit of length. This one is called Neophyte. So pithy, direct in some cases. Here's a collection by Rebecca Hazelton called Fair Copy. Let's go to the table of contents. You notice here how all the poems, let's see, let me get there, there it is, how all the poems are bracketed titles. That means that these poems don't officially, quote unquote, have titles, but they are using the first lines as the title to kind of ease us in. That's a strategy that sometimes we'll see. A lot of the classic poems that we'll look at didn't have any titles at all. What they had instead were just moving into the first line. Then we have a humorous poet, the late Bill Knott. This is a collection of his poems called The Quicken Tree. And Bill Knott has a lot of titles that are filled with parentheticals, epigram, change, the sonnet in IX, so that's lowercase, is it 9? I don't know. He's a poet that's playing around with a lot of different forms and a lot of different things. The Man Who Married His Checkout Lane, here next to The Lost Things. Maybe that's a title that seems like it could fit into a lot of books. Maybe The Man Who Married His Checkout Lane doesn't feel like it's going to fit into as many. Here's a collection, No Moon, by Nancy Imers. I'll just read titles. I'm at the table of contents. I'll just read them. Outer Space, Unplugged, A History of Navigation, Space Life, Betty and Joe, No Moon. World of Tomorrow, In the New Year, The Match Girl, Live Oaks, Born Warrior, Instructions for Cleaning. So just a deluge of titles, but they're telling a story. So I think we should think more about titles. I had an old professor of mine who, I should call her former professor of mine, who used to carry around a journal of titles. She would just jot them down. When she would have an idea for something that could potentially be the title to a poem, she'd write it down. I'm not saying we need to do that, but it's kind of a cool idea. I do that sometimes. And for me, sometimes the title comes first. I'll have a title, I'll write it down, and I'll think, okay, I will try to do something with this. Sometimes I'll be reading an article online. I will see something that will just challenge me to try to figure out how I can write about it. I was reading an article yesterday that mentioned something about Russian fish sticks. And I thought Russian fish sticks is an interesting title. Will that ever become a poem? I don't know, everybody. I'm not sure. But it's on my list of things that maybe will become a poem at some time or another. Again, I'm not sure. Stay tuned. We'll see what we do with it. And so it's a way of having just a collection that I can move toward, that I can look at. I can look at titles. Some of us are hesitant about titles. Some of us don't like them. Some of us maybe want to see titles in a way that is functional in the service of the poem, but not necessarily trying to create a lot of energy and interest on its own. Maybe the title is a year or a location or both. You know, if the title of the poem is 1996, Logan, Utah, maybe that starts to set a mood in a way that not everything else can do. So there are a lot of strategies toward titles. Here's what I want you to do for next time. Before our next class, where we meet next Tuesday, I would love for you to send me, and send them directly. Don't post them up anywhere. Don't post them on this thread. Send 3 titles to me. And these are 3 titles that are of prospective poems. These do not have to be poems, and in fact, I'd rather they not be. Don't let them be poems that you've written. Let them be titles that you have come up with that maybe someday will become poems. So think about what would draw you in as a title, thinking about some of the things that we've just looked at. There were funny ones, catchy ones, long ones, short ones. There's a lot of directions to take this. So give me 3. 3 titles that you would send me. And again, these are not poems that you've already written. These are not poems that already exist. These are 3 titles that you have come up with, but not written a poem for. Does that make sense? So I don't want you to jump in the table of contents to a book and just take 3 titles you like. I want this to be something that is original from you in terms of these titles, but I also don't need them to be poems you've already written. So email those to me, just send them through Canvas by class period next week so that I can have them and I want to do something with them. But I'd also love to hear from you about some other things. Even though I don't want you to send your titles to me through this thread, I would love for you to respond to this. And a couple things that I'm thinking we can talk about are what's your relationship with titles? Do you like them? Do you hate them? Do you feel like it's a hassle, or do you feel like it's a gift? What do you like about titles, and how do you deal with them? So if you could share a little bit of that, I think that would be really helpful. What you think makes for a good title, and how you personally feel about them. Write about that below. If you have any questions about any of this, you can ask me on that front too. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I look forward to hearing your comments, and I look forward to getting 3 titles from you by the beginning of class, preferably earlier in the day on Tuesday. Thanks, everybody, and you have a great week.